Man, I have to tell you, being an NPR, I'm totally geeking out right now. Like, I'm personally, and I know I'm a few months late to this, I'm halfway through Serial right now. And it's pretty cool. So thanks, I'm really excited to come out. And as John mentioned, this month's theme is climate. And I started thinking about how to talk about climate, in LA, right? And so I thought, well, obviously, let's begin with a short clip of, I thought that might be a little heavy for a Friday morning. What I couldn't get over as I thought about climate is actually, by definition, climate is something that, for the most part at least, doesn't change. It's actually kind of something that is the same, right? And if you actually Google the word climate, the word prevailing comes up in the first three definitions. Climate is how a place is. The climate in LA, generally around 73. The climate in winter in Minnesota, freaking cold, right? Like you kind of know these things are the same. And so I thought, well, obviously, that would be a really boring topic for a talk. Nothing's really changing. That's all good. So I thought, clearly what we need to talk about today is climate change. And the crazy change we're seeing here in LA over the last, especially I would say 3 years, when it comes to the entrepreneurial climate change of Los Angeles. In my opinion, just really in the last 3 years, we've hit an inflection point, and it is actually heating up, much the way of those scary Al Gore graphs. So I'm Cody, and what I do here in LA is I help technology startups with access to funding and mentorship through an organization called Techstars. And at Techstars, we operate about 15 startup accelerator programs around the world. So who here knows what a startup accelerator is? Have you heard of that? Okay, about a third, half the room. So in a nutshell, what a startup accelerator does is we help companies with existing startup ideas take their company to the next level. We provide them with access to intense mentorship and investment, and over a really compressed time period. So for us, it's about 3 months. We bring companies in, we give them access to a bunch of great entrepreneurs, a bunch of great investors, and help them learn about how to build their product and take it to the next level. And so that's different than another term you may have heard of. Has anyone heard of like an incubator? So an incubator, all similar, all good things, all like working on the forefront of innovation, trying to kind of take companies to the next level. An incubator typically comes up with good ideas and then spins them out as separate businesses. So an incubator truly incubates a new product idea, and then if it has legs, will launch it as its own company. So it's kind of a different structure. In an accelerator, the focus is almost exclusively on finding and accelerating a pre-existing company or business. So at Techstars, we have a global network of about 3,000 mentors, investors, alumni, and we help with people that are accepted into any one of our programs connect into these people from across our system. And to date, we've had about 550 companies go through one of our programs around the world. We're now helping about 150 new startups a year across our system. And similar to CreativeMornings, it's kind of expanded and grown into all these different locations. About half of our programs are, they're not necessarily focused on a specific theme. They're sort of general in purpose, and we just look for great startups. They're very geographically focused. So we have something called Techstars New York, Techstars London, Techstars Chicago, Techstars Seattle, on and on. And then about half of our programs are very vertically focused, and they're together with a corporate partner focused on going deep in that vertical. So for example, we run a finance accelerator all about the next generation disruptive finance stuff like Bitcoin and new payment processing systems and all of that. We run that together with Barclays in London and in New York. We, CreativeMornings now in San Diego. We just announced earlier this year, we run an accelerator down in San Diego together with Qualcomm, all focused on robotics, looking for the next interesting robotics companies. We run one in Detroit together with Ford and Verizon and a handful of other partners, all focused on next-gen automotive and next-gen mobility. So you kind of get the picture of how these work. So what we do here in LA is a program together with Disney. We operate, it's called Disney Accelerator, powered by Techstars. And what we're doing there is we're providing $120,000 in funding to 10 technology startups working in the media and entertainment space. So we're providing them with a ton of access to mentorship, both from the Disney executive team, from the very top, Bob Iger himself leaning in and engaging with the companies one-on-one, all the way through the rest of a lot of the Disney execs, entrepreneurs from throughout the entrepreneurial community, other entertainment folks, other technology folks, investors. And for 3 months, kind of hands-on in the summer here in LA. We did our first class in 2014, and we had a really wide range of companies, ranging from connected smart toys that connect to your smartphone, to mobile video, to advertising technology, consumer mobile applications, kind of across the board. Generally, if it's relevant to entertainment and media and it's technology focused, it's an interesting company for us to look at. So with this, I'm going through all this just to give you context that I'm really blessed with having being able to sit there on basically the front row and watch all these innovators who are going out and looking after the next generation of where the media and entertainment and creative worlds are going. And so with that context, I think we are absolutely living in exciting times here in Los Angeles. Quick note, if you're ever tweeting or hitting social media about the technology world in LA, apparently the hashtag is indeed TechLA. If you tweet at LA Tech, you are going to get replies from people who are fans of the Louisiana Tech football team. So just a quick note on that. And I think really it's over the last couple years, 2 to 3, as I mentioned, that we've hit this inflection point. I moved to LA 10 years ago. I moved here in 2005. And since 2005 until 2012, there were definitely a handful of startups in LA. There was this interesting entrepreneurial scene. Arguably, kind of the most notable during that period was MySpace. Any former MySpace employees here? Absolutely, great. Any former MySpace users here? Come on, everybody, it's okay, yes. MySpace is actually an amazing story if you think about it. It was launched in 2003. 2005, 2 years later, sold to News Corp for $580 million, and by 2006 was the most visited website in the United States. And then, Facebook happened and a few things happened. And, MySpace is making very, strong efforts now to try to come back, but, an interesting story for LA. Before then, LA had, a few really interesting tech wins that actually, if you're outside of the technology world, you may not even know about. In fact, really the way people make money on the internet, in a large part, was pioneered in Los Angeles. And 2 companies were a big part of that. So one, a company called Overture, that launched out of actually an incubator up in Pasadena called Idea Labs, basically invented sponsored search. It invented how you monetize search results. That company ended up selling to Yahoo in 2003 for $1.6 billion. And still powers a lot of, all this, interesting technologies around the internet. And then a company called Applied Semantics sold to Google also in 2003 for a little over $100 million. And they basically invented contextual ad units, which ended up becoming a large part of Google AdSense. So that's pretty interesting tech history for LA when it comes to the web. And so, okay, things have been building here, for the better part of a decade. 2012, January. Whisper raises their first seed funding round. May, Snapchat raises their first seed funding round. This is a company that now is reportedly valued at, something like $19 billion? That's 3 years later. Tinder, founded September 2012. That's just all in, the last 3 years. And of course, seeing all that happening, I dove right in because in mid-2012, I moved to San Francisco. I corrected course. I moved back in mid-2013. Really realized I missed LA. I loved LA. I loved, everything about this city, and I loved what was going on here professionally, but also just culturally in Los Angeles. And that's a lot of what I want to talk about for the rest of this morning. So I moved back down, helped get Techstars going here. And what does all this mean for those of us working not just in tech? That's actually not what I want to focus on. I want to focus on what does that mean for all of us working in the creative industries. To me, I think a lot of attention is spent on companies. What is this startup doing? What is that startup doing? What's the new trend in social media from this startup platform perspective? But what's fascinating is the impact that all of these are having culturally, that the impact that the consumerization of tech is having on us here in Los Angeles, just in terms of how we live our creative lives. And I want to focus on what the tech and the creative industries can learn from each other and how they're, in my opinion, becoming more and more the same every day. So to do that, I actually want to take you back to Kansas in 1991, of course. So I went to high school in the early 90s in the golden years of grunge. Wichita, Kansas was my hometown. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, those were like the bands of my high school era, right? MTV Buzz Clips was the thing. That's how you found out what was hot, right? I still remember where I was sitting when the MTV Buzz Clip for Radiohead's Creep video came on. I know exactly where I was sitting. I remember watching it. And then this kind of dark period went over music, right? This thing called alternative music. And there was this sort of macro frustration I had. You knew there was good stuff out there. I mean, the Nirvanas of the world, they came from somewhere. The next version of those bands they were out there somewhere. But how in the world could you find them? I didn't have an older brother or sister in college who was going to concerts and telling me what was going on. There was not really a thriving zine scene in Wichita. And so it was really hard to know what was great. And of course, there was all sorts of great stuff going on. Bands like Dinosaur Jr., Husker Du, Superchunk, Uncle Tupelo. I didn't find out about that stuff till like 5 or 10 years after their best material. In many cases, it was after I was in college or even later that I discovered some of those bands. And so, I was curious, but I didn't know what to do. And part of this is probably how I just justify the fact that Stone Temple Pilots was like one of my favorite bands in high school. But compare that to today, right? Pitchfork, Stereo Gum, Hype Machine, SoundCloud, YouTube, Songs of Tidal, Tumblr, 8-tracks. Man, if you're 15 today, like, finding out what the cool new music is, it's not a challenge, right? It's actually just right there. You sit back and hit play. And, in fact, MySpace, going back to that, was really kind of the first example of this kind of mainstream, open, cultural discovery platform. And that's why, actually, it was so awesome. You could find any band you wanted. I remember, even in the mid-2000s, kind of before MySpace really hit, you had to go kind of troll All Music Guide, and you would kind of go down the discovery rabbit hole, like clicking on related artists or related albums, and that's how you would find stuff. And then MySpace came along, and just everything was there, and you could listen to it. And so, I think it almost got to the point where I actually maybe I'd just gotten old, but that's probably true. But I became a little less interested in music a few years ago, it's not because there's not great stuff out there. There's amazing stuff out there, but like the hunt wasn't as fun. It almost became non-existent. And if I want good music, I can just lean back and go to Spotify and hit play on any of these things, and they're interesting. But I can't even remember what I was listening to last week. And I think, this notion of finding what's relevant, what's cultural, what's interesting, this notion that it's just right there is out there for all of us in almost any creative industry, whether it's fashion and kind of going through Tumblr blogs, whether it's film, whether it's games, whether it's architecture. If you want to go down the rabbit hole is bigger than you can ever imagine. And you can sit back and do it all day. And of course, as the internet tech product guy, it's achieved the ultimate meta in the last year with the launch of Product Hunt. Because now I can just go down the rabbit hole and find cool tech products all day. So if you want to become a walking expert, you can do it right from your phone. Like you can become the encyclopedia guy or gal just right from your phone. And again, almost too easy. I feel like when I was younger, identity was my CD collection, right? Like that was how I defined myself. You walked in, you saw what CDs I had, and like, I found a lot of pride in that. And it's shifted now. I feel like today it's not what you consume, it's more what you create. It's what you Instagram. It's what you put on Tumblr. It's what you're snapping to people. That's how, people today are actually defining their identity. That's amazing. We've shifted from a consumption world in terms of identity creation to a creation world. And that, to me, it's a long way of leading up to the fact that's where LA gets interesting. Because this town is where content is created, right? That's what this city has done well, not just for the last 3 years, but for the last 50 plus. And there's this explosion of new forms of creative content. And forms is the important word there. Like right now, storytellers are coming up not just with cool new stories, with all new ways of telling them by working together with what's going on in the tech community. And this is LA's new sweet spot, if you ask me. This is why I find LA just to be the most fascinating entrepreneurial city in the country right now, maybe even in the world. There's, of course, like stuff we hear about all the time, traditional, form factors that are innovating, right? So, Netflix, Hulu winning things like Emmys, when you're leaning back and you can all of a sudden binge watch a whole show and you can create a story arc over a whole season because you don't lose people when you get really nuanced and detailed. And that's amazing. But the real stuff that I think is fascinating right now is this back and forth between tech and storytellers, right? So look at something like Snapchat. Is Snapchat a disappearing photo app that the photo goes away after, your friend sees it? Or is it the first mobile-first video storytelling platform that you're getting amazing storytellers like Casey Neistat, who goes on Snapchat and has a conversation with his audience back and forth, and then talks about what he's going to shoot a video about, and then, then he goes and shoots it, and then he talks about what he shot, and has this whole dialogue, almost like chatting, but it's video, it's lean back, it's engagement. Now this news doing similar stuff on Snapchat, where they're actually drawing out the news of the day in like cool little pictures that you can engage with. Fascinating stuff. Vine. You watch a guy like Logan Paul on Vine, who is turning Vine from basically what could be like a loopy animated GIF platform into kind of stop motion live action, like figuring out how to use that 6-second window to tell an entire story. YouTube. I just heard the head of YouTube's monetization or entire content program earlier this week talking about how YouTube is now cutting 15 million checks a month to content creators on their platform. Wow. And then who knows what's going to happen in virtual reality. But I can tell you there are so many conversations happening in LA. Yesterday I was sitting in a coffee shop and 2 seats away from me were 2 people talking about an entire virtual reality content project that they're thinking about. Like that stuff, again, that's new to Los Angeles. So, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, can you imagine a screenwriter sitting in a coffee shop talking about API changes and terms of service updates and analytics and A/B testing? That kind of stuff, it didn't exist. And this alignment between the creative community and the product development cycles, I think, are fascinating. There's a values alignment. I think the different kind of types of companies, types of people, types of creatives are coming together in how they do things that's more similar. And there's a vested interest in each other's success. So with that, I want to wrap up quickly just by going through, in my opinion, kind of a handful of kind of key trends and terms that I've seen the creative world and from my perspective, what makes a great startup community now starting to come into the creative process around content design and creation of culture. So the first is mentorship. The notion of learning from those who've done it before and being humble. Not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to ask for advice. A good startup community is built on the hallmark of mentorship, on being able to get help and learn from people who've done it before, and you're seeing more and more of that in the content and creative communities as well. The notion of giving first. In the startup world, I think it's very important to give first. So if someone asks you for a favor, don't say, sure, but can I have a point of equity? Or sure, but here's the bill. Help, right? Now, don't get taken advantage of. Don't do that 10 times in a row for someone who doesn't ever return a favor. But help, right? The notion of giving back to the community is really important. And we're seeing more and more of this on the creative side as well, I think. This is an area that I think makes a great community. Intellectual honesty. Intellectual honesty to me is knowing what you suck at. Not being fake about it. When you're building a product, if you're writing code and the code doesn't work, it doesn't work. If your onboarding funnel is broken and users aren't actually using your product, it's not working, and you can be honest about that and talk about it. I think knowing about what is or isn't working across the creative process is really important, and being honest and open with your audience, with your users, having that dialogue with people about what did and didn't work is something that you can do now in this interactive kind of creative tech world that we've built. Critique, so giving feedback to others in a positive way. This is actually something I think the tech world can learn a lot from the creative community world about. The tech world actually has a tendency to be really snarky, and I think the creative world actually has a very long-standing process on critique and design review and kind of how that works. And I think these two worlds can definitely learn from each other. There is a notion of critique in tech. After you finish a week or 2 week sprint, you'll often have what's called a retro, where you have a review of what worked and didn't. But it's less so on the upfront creative side. I think these are areas that again can continue to come together. Iteration, the notion that the V1 of what you create isn't the final version of your product. That you can continue to move your product forward and make it get better over time. Measurement, obviously, is the notion that you can use data to make decisions. It doesn't mean you have to sacrifice vision or big picture originality just because you're measuring it. It just means you need to understand what's happening, and you can adjust course accordingly. I always say that the biggest mistake you can make is if you ship a product or you ship something to users and you don't know if it worked or not. Like, it's fine if it crashes and burns, because the whole notion is you're learning, right? You can learn it didn't work and you could do something again next time. But if you ship something and you just don't know if it's working, like, that's to me the ultimate in failure when you're building something, because then you could spend the next 3 months totally wasting your time on something that wasn't working and you just didn't know it. The notion of empowerment, the notion of network over hierarchy, of allowing people to that you work with to take on new projects, take on new work, try something out. Think about how you could have an apprentice type of program, or ways to just make people feel like they can try something new and can experiment. User centricity, the notion of talking to users, actually getting their feedback, understanding what they want. And this, interestingly, doesn't always mean showing them like something and saying, "What do you think of this?" It actually often means talking to them before you're ready to show them your product or your creation, and understanding what makes them tick in the first place. What's their motivation, so that you then go design the right thing for them to begin with. Scale. Something definitely that I think the tech world has leaned into hard, which is assume that you can have 10 times the audience that you have today, 100 times the audience that you have today. And how do you design what you're doing, whether it's process-wise, whether it's technology-wise? How do you design what you're doing to be able to accommodate that, so you're not trapping yourself into a corner? It doesn't mean you have to over-engineer it or over-design it from the beginning, but you have to be thinking to the fact that, like, this could hit a global audience, and this could take off. And how do we prepare for that? Test and experimentation. You often hear the term A/B testing. This is knowing how you can actually try a couple versions of something at the same time and see what works. Now, again, back to the same with measure. Like, you don't want to, or iterate, you don't want to throw out the notion of a big creative leap forward, but you don't want to, there's no reason to go into a big leap forward blind, because you can run small experiments and small tests on the side. Maybe if you're, again, you're creating content, you can do it on a side account. You can kind of see what people are engaging with before you push something big forward anyway, and you can learn. And then, very importantly, this is the last one, the notion of the side project. Man, this is something that has been around in music and in film and in these worlds for so long. And I think in technology, my experience is the best startups get started not because someone says, I'm going to do a startup. And then they hire a lawyer and they come register a domain name and they said, okay, I've got a startup now. Now let me find people and let's work on our startup. The best startups happen because like a couple really smart, people get together and hang out over the weekend and they talk about what's exciting to them right now and they kind of whittle down an idea and then they start working on it on the side and they maybe show it to a few friends and a few friends think that's really interesting and then next thing you know it's kind of got some legs and then you decide to jump in or not. And kind of startups, they don't happen textbook. They all happen kind of messy and not planned. And that notion of side projecting and always exploring the white space and keeping your mind open to try something new and have a weekend where you're just going to throw stuff against a whiteboard and see what sounds interesting to you and your friends. Like that stuff, that's so powerful. Making time for that in your day and in your life. That's where I see innovation happen. That's where I see the next ideas come from. That's what I got for you guys today. Thank you very much.